Hi, I'm Andrea, and welcome back to my writing channel. Today I'm going to talk about something that I've been wanting to talk about for a very long time, but I wanted to wait until I knew I was ready. And that is getting back into a project that we have taken a break from. Usually not a break that we've planned. If you've watched my past couple of videos, you know that I have done just that. And I will link my last video up here just in case you missed it. There I talked about finishing the outline, all of the steps that I went through to actually finish that outline finally, and I can officially say, as I'm recording this video, that I have started the drafting. It's chaotic, but it's going well. Getting back into a project after we've taken a break can be one of the most daunting things that we do as a writer, especially if you have a full-time job, if you have, full-time university, whatever's going on in your life. If writing is constantly kind of the side thing, the hobby thing, the thing you do when you have time. You've probably experienced this. I've experienced it many times throughout my years of writing. And lately, this last time getting back into writing was one of the toughest because I had so much working against me in my own brain. I had so many feelings of insecurity, of feeling like, could I really call myself a writer anymore? Because it'd been just so long since I had actually written. So now that I've gotten over this hurdle, obviously there's more chaos to come with the actual drafting and everything, but this hurdle of actually getting started, I've done it now. I've succeeded. So what I thought might be useful and maybe interesting for you as well is to share some of the things that I did going into it and also some of the learnings that I had. This is accumulated from several projects and different breaks that I've had in the past for my writing, but it's something that kind of came to a head this time, and it really was useful for me in how I approached getting back into this project. Obviously, this list is not exhaustive. It's also not prescriptive. These things might not work for you. They might work great for you. Maybe you'll take a little bit here and there. Maybe you'll add some of your own things, because I'm sure there'll be things that I didn't include in this video that maybe you are thinking might be useful. Definitely leave any of your advice in the comments below for me and also for other writers who might jump in the comments as well. We can have just an overall discussion about this topic. I've organized my own thoughts and learnings in a sort of checklist style. So some of them will overlap. Some of them, again, like I said, you might not do at all, or you might want to skip over and then come back to. But for me, this is sort of how I went about it in a pseudo-chronological order with a little overlap here and there. The first thing is to recreate the mood or the general atmosphere that you had last time you were working on this project. It could be a playlist that you listen to, a specific soundtrack. For me, I definitely had a handful of sort of moods and different albums that I was listening to when I was working on these original notes last year. It could be a favorite thing that you like to drink. For me, it's usually coffee, maybe tea. Could be something stronger for you. I don't know. I'm not judging. It could be a certain sweater that you wear, a certain place that you work. In my case, I have moved since then. I have an entirely new apartment where I'm living in an entirely new city, like none of the same places that I was working on this project before, but I do have a similar vibe to my desk. I, arranged myself and my sort of surroundings as best I could to remember where I left off. I think it's really important to try and remember where you were through your different senses, your auditory senses, your visual senses. If you had a mood board or, aesthetic pictures, I often like to change the wallpaper of my computer to match, whatever project I'm working on. It could be pictures of my characters, or it could just be a place or sort of vibe. I found something on Pinterest that sort of emulates what I want, and I'll make it my wallpaper so that every time I load my computer, I get a little bit more of that flavor. It could be a candle. Maybe scent is important for you. Whatever it is, even if you decide later you want to change it, I think it's important to remember where you were through these other senses, because it can kind of help create the atmosphere that you need to put yourself back in those shoes and figure out where you left off. The second point on my checklist is to reread everything. And I mean everything. Depending on where you left off in your project, this might be very little, it might be a whole hell of a lot, but I think it's really important to not skip this step. I have skipped this step before, and trust me, you do not want to do that. In the past, I have had some ideas while I was taking a break, because I'm usually thinking about my project, whatever project it is, while I'm on that break. And I have had what I thought were epiphanies, jumped back into a project, made huge changes, thinking it was going to fix everything, and it was so brilliant. And then I will, go back a few chapters, reread something else, reread a different note that I had to the side, and I will realize there was a very good reason why it was not that way before, and now I have broken something. Learn from my mistakes, please. In my case with this project, I had a whole bunch of notes. I had scattered things here and there. I had a notes app that was full of just random musings, random ideas that I had. I've been thinking about this project since I started it last year. While I was moving from the US to Canada, I was thinking about it. I was making random notes. I was not at all in the mindset of where I left off. I didn't remember decisions that I'd made, so I would sometimes write something down like, maybe this character could be a little bit like this, but I don't know if it's going to conflict with something that I've already planned. And part of my reread was organizing these notes, figuring out what went where, and then the decisions came, but only after I had reread everything and kind of put myself back into the project and understood what I had. Only once you understand what you had can you figure out what you need to have, if that makes sense. It can be a lot if you have a full draft, for example. You don't necessarily want to read 100,000 words with all the notes to accompany it, but trust me, you're going to want to do it. You're just going to want to do it. Maybe if you've taken a very short break from it, you can skim some things. If you want to make notes to the side, I'll often do that when I'm in revisions or when I'm getting back into something of any sort, even if it's just notes. I'll make notes to the side. Maybe this is something I could do, but I would really recommend you don't start changing stuff until you've really rehashed everything and you're familiar with all the ins and outs of what you had planned before. Maybe there's a very good reason why something was a certain way, and you need to remember that before you can decide if it needs to be a different way. 3 is my favorite number, so maybe it's not a coincidence that this one is one of my favorites as well, and very, very important. Identify the purpose of the story. After I've reacquainted myself with my notes, my, character sketches, my world building, whatever part of the outline or draft that I may have had already, what I really like to do is take a step back from that and look at the overarching idea, the overarching progress, what I have basically, and try and remember, why did I do this in the first place? How did I get to wherever I left off? Where did the idea of the story come from? What was I thinking at the time? What was the intention? It could be something really important, like a cause that you want to defend, a situation or a person that you want to represent. It could just be something fun, like you had a really cool character idea or a really exciting story that you just really, really wanted to tell. But whatever it is, find that soul. Find what made you want to write the project in the first place, and also the thing that is drawing you back to it now. And that's probably going to be the same thing, or there's going to be an awful lot of overlap between those two things. Writing is hard. Getting back into a project is hard. You're going to have some more hurdles in the future as you're working on this project. Throughout the drafting, throughout the revisions, you're going to have a lot of roadblocks along the way. And the one thing that is going to keep you going, the one thing that probably has kept you going up until this point where you are, is the soul of whatever you're doing. So identifying that, remembering that, holding on to that is super, super important when you're getting back into it, and it will help you get through those hurdles that you're going to face. I'll usually start thinking about this already when I make the decision to come back to a project. Usually there's a reason why I decide I'm going to work on that one instead of, going off in a new direction with a new project. But I think it was also really useful to think about this again as I was reading through everything that I had, and then as I was kind of in the finished part of rereading, to think about it one more time and to kind of redefine that to myself. Sometimes it can even be helpful to write it down, but you can at least just think about it in your head. What is the purpose? What was the purpose? And what is my purpose now coming back to it? Only once I've done all of those other things first do I move on to number 4, and that is to make some decisions. And some of them will be tough. If you're like me, you will have been tempted through each one of these steps to make a bunch of decisions, to make changes. Like I said before, please don't do that yet. You can make some notes, you can have some ideas and start writing those down, but please don't make any huge decisions that cannot be reversed until you've fully gotten to this stage and you remember exactly where you left off. Then you're in a position, you know enough about your story again that you can start making some tough decisions. You can start axing some things. You can start changing some things. You can start figuring out what doesn't work. If it's been a while since you worked on your project, there might be a lot of things to change, especially if we're talking a gap of 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, however long it's been. You've changed as a person. You have some more perspective. Maybe you've even grown as a writer if you've been working on other things. If you've been, living life, maybe even, that affects our writing hugely. Whatever it is, you probably have quite a few changes that you want to make. It also depends on what stage you left off in the drafting. So if you have half a draft, when you come back to it, maybe you don't have too many grand changes to make. But if you were like me and you just had the very beginnings of a pseudo outline, you're gonna probably have a lot of things you want to change. I would caution you about just making huge changes without fully thinking them through, or without considering at least the possibility that you're just doing it differently because you want to do something differently. Sometimes different is just different and it's not better. Sometimes it's much better, but just keep that in the back of your mind that writers, we like to, edit what we've done. We're never satisfied. We always want to go back to our past projects and change everything because all of our new ideas are better. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're just a new idea. So keep that in mind as you're going back through it. Remember that what you did was precious. Maybe it's garbage, but it's precious garbage. And don't just change it for the sake of changing it, to represent your new era. Maybe your past era had some things worth salvaging. You also might have the opposite problem. I don't generally have this problem until I'm in a later stage, but maybe you don't want to change stuff. Maybe you're very possessive of your past work. I tend to get this way once I've drafted at least a full draft, but often if I've already revised once, then I start really hesitating to make any changes whatsoever because everything is precious then. And if you're like that, maybe it would be more useful to think the opposite way and remember that maybe you have some new perspectives worth applying to your past project, and maybe your new perspectives are actually just enlightenment on how to make it better. Also remember that no matter what stage you're in, you probably have at least one revision ahead of you, maybe several revisions. And if you're not quite sure about something, just go with your gut, with whatever feels natural in the moment, but leave yourself some space to revise that in the future. Focus on what you need to focus on right now and save the rest for whatever comes in the next stage. Number 5 is the inevitable. Get back into the actual writing. It's very, very important to remember where you left off, to go back through everything, to re-understand your story. But at one point, the point of getting back into this story and not just doing something else is that we want to move forward. We want to take wherever we left off and actually progress from there. If we have part of a draft, we want to finish the draft. If we have just some random notes, we want to actually get into the either outlining if you're an outliner, or the drafting, or both if you're an outliner like me, outlining and then drafting. You want to actually make some steps forward at one point. If you still don't feel like you have your feet firmly beneath you, maybe it's just a sign that part of your process, for at least this particular project, is to do some discovery as you write, to be a little bit of a pantser and to just jump into it. It'll probably feel a little bit intimidating. It might even feel very, very scary. It might be very difficult as well, depending on how long you've taken a break from your project. In my case, the writing and the sort of planning stages were very familiar to me, but where I felt the most rusty was when I started the actual drafting, when I started actually writing the story. There was so much pressure that I'd put on myself to make it so good because it'd been so long that it was just kind of stewing in the back of my mind. So it was hard, and those first few chapters might be complete trash. I don't know. But again, sometimes you just have to get them down and move past that first stage before you can actually go back and make the changes you need to make and polish like you need to polish. If you left off in the middle of a draft, it might also feel very jarring to go back and look at what you had most recently written and then look at your new stuff that you're writing. It might feel like two different people are writing it. That is okay. You can, fix it in post. You can fix it in revisions. It is all part of the process. It is just a thing that we have to accept is a reality if we've taken a break from our project. It's gonna feel rusty. It might be very jarring. It might be very two-sided. You might really feel like there was the before part of the project and there's this after part and it's totally different. That is okay. You can smooth it out in a future revision. What's important is that you're making steps forward, and even garbage steps, even bad writing or bad decisions or a lot of self-doubt, even those things that you're working through as you're moving forward, even if those feel terrible at the time, they are progress. They are steps forward. Pat yourself on the back. We're making steps forward. That's what I'm doing as well as I'm drafting. Remembering that maybe it's not everything that I thought it would be as I was outlining or as I was planning, but I will make it better in a future revision. Right now, I'm writing. I am putting words down on the page. I am actually taking the things, the ideas, the things in my head, the things in my jumbly notes, and I'm making them a story. That's super exciting. If you're feeling super rusty, remember that the habit will also come back. It will get better as you get back into it. If it feels clunky, if it feels unnatural, it will get back to what it was before. It just takes some time, and time not doing it because you're too scared to do it is not going to move you forward. Time actually doing it and accepting that it might be a little bit difficult and rusty and weird at first, that is the time that's actually going to count, and that's the only way you're going to get back to where you were before in terms of your comfort level. I think we're on number 6 now, but that is to create a routine moving forward. Maybe this looks a lot like the routine that you had before. Maybe you're really trying to get back into whatever swing that you had before. Maybe this is going to be a lot different. Maybe you've had a very significant life change since then, or if it's been several years, most likely your life is just very different. Whatever it is, try and think about a realistic way moving forward that you can keep this story more a part of your typical routine. Sometimes we'll find ourselves in the situation of feeling super obsessed with getting back into our writing, and we're just so in love with this project that we might spend 8 hours one day just working on it. And then we feel super burnt out, or we hit a snag of some sort and we feel suddenly like maybe this is not going to be as easy as we thought. And then we stop for another week or 2 weeks or a month because we burnt ourselves out by doing too much too soon. That's not to say that you shouldn't work on it for several hours if you have, a certain time off or you just feel super motivated. That's okay. But try to keep a routine as a goal when you're getting back into it. Try and keep that at the forefront of your mind and make it sustainable. It's okay if you want to do an hour every single day for the first couple of weeks that you're back into a project. But if you start feeling yourself wearing down, consciously think about how can I continue this without getting myself into a situation where I'm going to take another break. It can be, as simple as 15 minutes every day or half an hour every couple of days, 1 hour every single Saturday, whatever it is, whatever works for you, whatever's realistic. It's much more important to do a little bit more frequently than a whole bunch all at once and then nothing for several weeks. Even an hour once a week is enough that you're not going to have to rehash everything every single time and having to restart every single time that you do this project, because that's going to get really, really exhausting. And you're probably going to find yourself losing passion for the project just by the fact that every time you work on the project, you're just going through everything that you've done before and you never feel like you can make progress forward because you can't, because you are constantly confused on where you even left off. If a strict routine doesn't really work for you, then I would still make sure that you have a specific attitude towards your story. So for me, I don't have a specific day that I have to work on my story, but I have a general idea of how many times a week I would like to work on my story. And I also definitely feel like if I go more than a couple of days without working on it, I have that urge again because it feels like I need to do this every 2-3 days. It's not a strict routine, but it's definitely something that I keep at the forefront of my mind, and I keep myself on a rhythm, I guess I would say, is more so my approach to it, at least right now. I don't have a specific day or a specific amount of time that I have to dedicate to it, but I do have a specific rhythm to guide me through this drafting process. Last, but definitely not least, is to keep your story alive in every way that you possibly can. Even when I'm in a period where I'm not really writing and I'm not actively working on something, I will generally still have something kind of stewing in the back of my mind. But I find that as I'm getting back into a project, as soon as I start feeling like I have a little bit of ground beneath my feet, as I'm drafting, as I'm making progress forward, the ideas that I have and the creative energy that I have when I'm doing other things tends to be even more useful and fruitful because I actually have something to stand on as I'm, thinking and mulling over my story, instead of kind of random ideas that I don't quite know if I can sink into my story whenever I get back to it. I actually know where I've left off, and can have ideas that might actually be useful and might actually work in my story. This is also really important if you had started to doubt yourself during that time off. If, like me, maybe you started to think, can I even call myself a writer anymore because I'm not writing? If you started to have ideas like that, then keeping this energy alive, even if you're not actively working on it in that moment, even if you're just taking a shower or going to bed, getting ready for bed at night, brushing your teeth, whatever you're doing, those activities that we do where we might not be using too much of our brain, where we can just kind of let our brain wander, it's most helpful when it's a no pressure sort of context. I'm not saying to constantly be putting yourself under the pressure of having epiphanies and being productive or anything like that. I'm just talking about those moments when you just kind of want to indulge. That can be really important in just kind of putting yourself back in your writer's shoes, reassuming that identity a little bit. When you have your writing routine, those moments when you dedicate to writing, then you can put a little pressure on yourself. But in these contexts, I'm really just talking about keeping the vibes alive, keeping, positive associations with your story, and just let yourself feel, again, the intention of your story, what you're trying to do. And that can be a really useful motivation for continuing your story. All in all, it is a huge challenge to get back into a project that you have dropped like a hot potato. It's tough. It's tough to remember where you left off. It's tough to know how to make decisions moving forward. Whether you want to change a bunch of stuff or whether you really want the spirit of the project to stay the same, it is definitely very difficult to do. But it is a noble cause. It is what we do as writers, especially if you are a part-time writer or a hobby writer, and you're more prone to taking these breaks when you don't necessarily want to because life just gets in the way. It's not easy, but it is worth it. Let me tell you, it is worth it. I am just starting to draft. I have no idea where this draft is going to take me, but I'm so excited. I'm feeling really good about it. I'm feeling like this is something that I will be super proud of once I come out the other side of the first draft. Like I said, let me know in the comments below if you have other things to add to this checklist, if some of these things really worked for you, if they didn't. I hope that this can be at least a starting point for you if you're getting back into a project, or further motivation if you've been trying for a while and you don't quite know how to go about it. So much of our creativity is fueled by our passion and our motivation. So let's really not forget those things. Let's remember that there is a reason we love writing, and there is a reason why we chose to do it in the first place. And even though it's very, very hard and very challenging, we have picked a very difficult hobby, I must say, but it is something that matters to us, and that's why we do it. And it will get us through our hardest days. Maybe those hardest days are restarting a project, but it is worth it. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and leave a comment down below to let me know if it was useful for you, or like I said, if you have any extra advice to add. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you very soon in another writing video.